Tim Marsh, and I'm very pleased to kick off these SHPonline thought pieces, short coffee time break pieces about safety culture, safety leadership, behavioural safety. We very much hope you find them thought-provoking. Obviously, personally, I very much hope you agree with them, but if you disagree with them, that's fine too. Please just comment below the line. We're actively looking for dialogue here. Thank you. This first talk is about safety culture. Now, all organisations have a safety culture. It just depends what sort of culture you have. The important thing is that the culture is incredibly important because of the impact that it has on day-to-day behaviour. And this talk is really to try and describe what a culture is and why and how it has the impact that it does. Organisational culture is comprised of four things, if you want to boil it down. The first one, of course, is compliance with rules and regulations. But most organisations that we would work with would have hit diminishing returns for that. And then there are three other things that distinguish the average organisations from the excellent organisations. And those things are the mindful safety concept, if you would, the learning of what's wrong out there, because there's always something wrong out there, and it's how good you learn that distinguishes the best from the average. The second one is the quality of the leadership, and what you're looking for is transformational leadership, not transactional. So basically coaching rather than telling, praise rather than criticism, leading by example, workforce involvement. And the final one, of course, is engagement. Engagement largely being a reaction to the leadership and the learning. If they're listening to you and empowering and coaching you, the engagement flows from that. So it's basically a four-pronged attack that we're after: broad compliance, learning, leadership and engagement. Imagine you go to a new island that you've never been to before. You pick up a hire car, and as you leave the airport, you see a sign that looks something like this. You'd be absolutely primed, of course, to drive at about 77 kilometres an hour. But I want you to imagine as you hit the main roads, what you find is the inside lane is doing 90, the middle lane is doing 100 kilometres an hour, and it is sheer carnage in the outside lane. Now, at conferences, I used to ask the question, what speed would you be doing 10 minutes from now? And of course, everybody will say, well, you have to keep up with flow. So a better question is, how many people would have used the outside lane within 20 minutes? And the answer is about 60% of the audience, because you respond to what you find on the ground, not to what it says on the lid. And of course, that symbol, that sign, is analogous to things like training, safe operating procedures, rules, regulations, and inductions. Those things are absolutely necessary, but not as sufficient. You'll respond to them, but if you find that the locals are doing something else, you'll be hugely influenced by those locals. So, for example, imagine the CEO's talk at the annual safety day. You want it to be powerful and impassioned, but that on its own is again necessary but not sufficient. Because no matter how powerfully that message is conveyed, if the people on the ground, when you get out into the workplace, are not behaving in a safe way, that's not necessarily going to have the impact that you want. It's the same with training. An awful lot of organisations think that training is key. But training is, again, the very definition of a necessary but not sufficient. They certainly need to know what to do, but whether or not they'll do it is a different matter entirely. And again, if you go out there and you find that compliance is around 50% people be acting safely, 50% people acting unsafely, as a new start and as a subcontractor, you've got free choice. You can do what you like, but you don't stand out. Now, if you can get those key behaviours up over a tipping point of around 90%, then the whole thing becomes self-reinforcing and self-sustaining. So, for example, training is just base one. Of course, the workforce need to know what it is they're going to do, but whether or not they do it is another matter entirely, because compliance is discretionary. And engagement with the risk has a much better correlation with the outcome than training and compliance does. Now, that's going to sound counterintuitive, I know, but I can give you a simple example. Imagine your 10-year-old child is about to cross a level crossing, and they just walk up to it, press the button, wait for it to turn green, and then walk blindly. Or would you prefer them 100 yards down the road, trying to cross the road where they shouldn't, but with really heads-up dynamic risk assessment as they go? Which one involves the greater risk? Because actually engagement with the risk, heads-up engagement with the risk, is a much better predictor of outcome than broad compliance. So in summary, compliance is just base one. Culture is king.